Man, it's cold out here. Hi guys, I'm Galen's brother Claire, and a little bit ago he said that you guys are learning about plants and wondered if I'd want to do a little blurb on wild edible plants, and so totally my thing. I have a passion for such a thing, and I guess I've been doing it ever since I'm little, but only in recent years have I kind of been really digging in and learning about a lot of different plants and their uses. So yeah, I like edible plants, but I also kind of love to find other uses for plants too. I guess I think that just about every plant has a use, and there probably is no such thing as a weed. But anyway, why in the world would someone want to forage for edible plants? And I'll just tell you why I do. First of all, because it's fun. I just love it. I don't know why, but it just lights me up, and I really enjoy going through the woods and being able to pick out things here and there, or going through a meadow or some path somewhere, and just knowing what I'm looking at and finding something that's useful or edible. So I have probably gotten to taste well over 50 species of plants, and I kind of keep a running list. I like to learn new ones, and so I keep a running list, and my list is at over 50 now. So why else do I do it besides the fun of it? Well, I guess along with the fun of it is just the culinary experience. It's an adventure of the taste buds. Wild plants often have very distinct flavors, very strong flavors. You almost have to get your mouth used to it. A lot of wild plants, edible wild plants, you can't really find in the supermarket, although more and more of them are showing up on places like Amazon, believe it or not. So the other month, when I was out of dandelion and didn't feel like going and harvesting any, I went online and bought dandelion root for like $16 a pound. It was crazy. I won't do that again. So why else do I do it? Oh, it's free. All you have to do is ask permission of the landowner, or if you got a back 40 that you can go forage in. The parks often have rules about taking stuff, although they usually allow you to take fruit, wild fruit, but they don't want you taking the leaves and roots of plants. But this park that I'm in right now has no such rules, so I like to come to this park, and I can feel free to take things here and there. Another reason why I enjoy this so much is for the nutritional and medicinal benefits of many of these plants. So as I come to know a plant, I look into what its nutrition is, and what it has in it. So what kind of vitamins and minerals is this high in? And often what I find is they're very high in particular vitamins and minerals, phytochemicals, whatnot, and pretty much blow the socks off of cultivated foods if you do a side-by-side comparison of cultivated foods that are typical in our diet versus wild foods. Even something like wild rice versus cultivated rice, completely different animal. I guess you should say plant. But so yeah, and then a lot of them have nutraceutical or medicinal benefit as well, and I just enjoy poking around with plant medicine, and it's quite gratifying sometimes to have been able to provide some of that for my family. My son had a whooping cough, and I happened to have mullein growing in my flower bed, which was also a wild plant. And mullein was used by the Native Americans for a lot of respiratory diseases, and mullein, along with a few other plant medicines, we knocked out his whooping cough in a matter of about 2 or 3 weeks, and the textbook says it should take about 6 weeks for whooping cough to go away. So that was pretty fun. And then yeah, just a lot of other things. We've been able to utilize various plants for medicine in our home, and it's kind of fun having a wild pharmacy. And then another thing that I really enjoy about edible wild plants is the educational experience it is for me. I am continually learning, and every one thing I learn, there's 5 I discover that I have yet to learn, because everything's so interconnected. So you learn about one thing, and then that thing is connected to, many other things. So, for example, if I learn about plantain, I can learn about the history of plantain. I can learn about how it relates to the soil. I can learn about its nutritional profile. I can learn some things about the human body when I study about plantain. So let me just talk about those things for a little bit. So the history of plantain is pretty cool, or not, but the early European trade to the Americas, they would bring the ships over empty so they could go back full, but that's a problem for sailing the seas, and so they would fill the hull with dirt from the old world, and when they get here they would dump it and load up with their cargo and go home again. And often that dirt had many seeds in it, like dirt always does, and plantain was one of those that made its way to the New World. And interestingly, the Native Americans called it white man's footprint. And the reason they called it white man's footprint, because it seemed like wherever the white man went, plantain would follow. But probably the real reason was because plantain does extremely well at scavenging nutrients in compacted soil where many other plants can't survive. So roadways and pathways, which kind of became much more prevalent at the time of European settlement, often had plantain growing around, and you'll still find plantain on heavily compacted soils where there's cars driving on grass, or a lot of foot traffic. Right outside our back door is where the most plantain grows at our house. So you can know something about the soil if you know something about plantain. And then plantain is extremely beneficial for your digestion, and especially for your colon. And also really good for external. It's a topical, it's an astringent, so for acne and rashes and insect bites. I was in the orchard this summer picking peaches, and I got stung by a ground wasp, and they're huge suckers, and got me right on the knuckle. And so I just quickly looked around for some plantain, chewed it up in my mouth a bit until it got juicy, and put the juice on my sting, held it there for a couple minutes, and honestly the pain completely went away after about 5 or 10 minutes, and I didn't feel it for the rest of the day. So yeah, just because I knew about plantain. And then another thing about plantain is that I said it's really good for the colon. So we got one little kiddo that seems like he's constipated more than he's not, and we discovered this, and so we're going out in the backyard and picking plantain and putting it in smoothies and whatnot. And it's kind of neat to have something right in your backyard for that need, rather than going and getting some laxative over the counter. So yeah, besides what I've mentioned already, I really enjoy wild edible foraging, just to connect me to nature. I'm a pretty high-strung person, and being out here calms me down and kind of grounds me, and I just love any type of connection to the natural world, and something that people are starting to recognize that's deficient in our modern lifestyles. And there's even this thing called nature deficit disorder, and so if I have anything to do with for my own life and for the life of my children, I hope not to have nature deficit disorder. And this is one way to motivate me to get out in the woods. Often taking the kids to the park on a Sunday afternoon and just enjoying a walk in the woods. And then as we're walking, we're like, hey, here's some whatever, you know, persimmons, yay. Or we're taking a walk this summer, and I discovered my first pawpaw tree in the wild, and boy was I excited, but the pawpaws weren't ready yet, and so we kind of had to keep coming back to that same tree through the summer, well, around the time that I knew they'd be ripe, and found them at just the right time, and boy did we get a treat, and we savored every bite. If you've never had pawpaw, you got to try some pawpaw. It's the biggest Native American fruit, and it's a very tropical flavor. People say like a combination of a banana, mango, and a pineapple flavor, but it's very custardy in texture. Has a lot of seeds, big seeds, but just crazy flavor that I don't know, it can't really compare to any other food that I've eaten except some tropical foods. But here it is in North America, and it's the largest North American fruit, native North American fruit. So that's a little bit of why I like to forage. So now let's go to just maybe a few pointers on some words of caution when you're going out on a foray to gather wild edibles. Number one, you want positive identification. So if you go to the supermarket and you have a bunch of bananas and you take it to the checkout and the cashier tells you that they're grapes, you say, no they're not, they're bananas. And that's the kind of positive identification that you want to have for any plant that you put in your mouth, because there are plants out here that can harm you, that have toxins, and a few that are fatal if ingested. So you really want to know what you're doing. But I like to say stick with some really simple, common ones to begin with. Like that's why I mentioned plantain a lot. Plantain, dandelion, white pine, super easy to identify. They don't have dangerous lookalikes, you know, and then just keep adding one at a time. A lot of people, when they walk into the woods or a field, a wildflower meadow or whatnot, you know, it's like a wall of green to them, and it takes a long time for that wall of green to turn into individual plants that you can say, oh, that is a such and such, and that is a such and such. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of species of plants in northeastern North America. So you know, there's just a wealth of information to be known, but just take it one step at a time, but get your positive identification before you eat a plant. The second thing is be aware of possible pollutants. So a lot of times, you know, gathering wild edibles, you might be tempted to jump out of your car to roadway and just start picking wineberries along the edge of the road. And I did that once. Wineberries are phenomenal. They're one of my favorite berries, and some people call them wild raspberries. But I found these along a pretty busy road, and I got to picking, and after a while, you know, I just noticed that they kind of had black. I was getting black stuff on my hands from picking them. The berries are kind of sticky, and after a while, I just noticed there was black residue, and it was just simply the particulates from the roadway. You know, who knows what type of pollution from the road, dust and exhaust and diesel fumes and who knows what were on those wineberries. Probably not a good thing to be putting in your mouth. And but I ate them anyway, and since then have decided that that's not probably the way I'll do it from here on out. And another time I was hungry for watercress in the springtime, and so I went for a little walk in the park looking for a small stream that might have watercress. And lo and behold, there's a small stream, yay! Oh, there's watercress, yay! And then looking a little bit closer, and here the whole stream was like orange, and the rocks were orange, really odd looking colors. And I looked up, and sure enough, right there was a sign that the park had posted. It said, this water is contaminated with landfill leachate, and just caution to not be eating it, drinking it, I mean. So here, this site in County Park was the site of a landfill years ago, and there's several of those in our park real close to our house. So, you know, just knowing that there's a landfill underneath that's affecting the water, that's probably affecting the soil, probably not a good place to be foraging for wild edible food if you know, those things will go right into the plants. So, okay, so we talked about positive identification and being aware of pollutants. And then thirdly, a caution was just to be careful and think forward into the future. You know, if you take everything that a plant has to propagate itself, you won't have that next year when you come to that same spot. You know, when you're harvesting stinging nettle and dandelion and plantain, you're really not going to affect the population of any of those in the world. They are very prolific plants, and they're not going away anytime soon. But something like wild ginger, for example, is very rare, and what's harvested is the root. And so if you dig that root up on the one little wild ginger plant you find in the woods, it won't be able to reproduce at all. So be mindful of that. Fruit is, you know, typically a very common thing to take and doesn't affect the reproduction because there's usually plenty of fruit that goes in the ground in seed form. So, you know, you taking some of the fruit's not going to affect the future of that species. But yeah, just think about that. Some people say, you know, never take more than 1/3 of what you see there. Or if it's on a tree, just take what you can reach, you know, that kind of thing. But basically be mindful of the future when you're harvesting. Okay, so let's go out and see what we can find. You guys picked kind of a bad time of the year to be talking about wild edible plants, but amazingly there's still plenty out there, and there is stuff to find, and if nothing else, to scout out for things for next year or for next growing season. But yeah, just to say that really to get a good glimpse of the availability of wild edibles, it's a year-round view, because some are, you know, only to be harvested in the springtime, others only in the summer, others only in the fall, and very few of them are year-round. So here we go. Here's some wild onion. Some people call it wild garlic. Very common plant. You probably have it in your yard, and you maybe have even tried to eat it already. But it has a very strong garlic flavor, as many wild plants have. They have very distinct, rich, strong flavors, and it's something that people that are beginners at eating wild plants often need to get used to. But your taste buds can quickly learn to enjoy those flavors. And you know, so this wild onion, for example, if you cook with it, you want to use less of it than your cultivated garlic. But yeah, it is quite delicious, especially the chives on just the greens on the top. You can use like you would chives on a soup or something. The bulbs are very small, a little bit hard to process. I've already gotten the bulbils that grow at the top after they go to seed, and ground those up in a coffee grinder, dried them and ground them up in a coffee grinder for like a granulated garlic. That was quite nice. Funny story about wild onion. When we were kids, me and Galen one day, and my sister Jewel, went out in the yard, and we were nibbling on wild onion greens, and yeah, quite strong flavored and made our breath smell foul. But we got to noticing that if you took the greens and you rubbed them between your hands, you could make your hands really green. What we didn't realize is that it also made your hands really stink, and you couldn't wash it off. And I just remember going up to the bathroom and scrubbing with soap, trying to get that garlic smell off our hands, and we couldn't get it off. And we were afraid that Mom would find out. And I don't know why we thought she'd care, but anyway. You can stain your hands green, and you can make them smell like garlic if you rub wild onion on your hands. Okay, next up is sumac. Sumac is a tree, and it's called staghorn sumac. And this is an amazing one. I just discovered it this summer. But these are the seed pods that grow off the tree. So now they hang on the tree in the winter time, but obviously I have no leaves to show you, or I'm not even standing by a sumac tree. But I cut these off yesterday from a sumac tree, and let me tell you how to use these things. The seed pods are heavily coated with vitamin C, or ascorbic acid and citric acid, and so all you got to do is cut a bunch of these off, soak them in a gallon of water overnight, and you've got a lemonade. It's phenomenal. Had some last summer, and it was super refreshing summertime drink. I added a little bit of mint from the garden and some stevia for sweetener, and yeah, like I said, it was some of the best lemonade I ever had. So a couple things to know about staghorn sumac. One is the ascorbic acid is water soluble, and so right after the rain, these things will have hardly any flavor, and the texture is awful. I tried eating it just into my mouth, and it was just like powdery and I don't know, disgusting. But you stick it in the water, and the citric acid and ascorbic acid quickly dissolves into the water in 24 hours or 12 hours. You can shake it up and kind of speed up the process too if you give it some agitation. So that's a fun one. But if you're looking for these, do a little bit of research and look what the plant looks like. The staghorn sumac, they always stand up. They're on the tree upright like this, not down. They're upright, and that's a positive ID for sumac. So just think thumbs up, and you're good to go. If the flowers are hanging down, it might be something else that's not good to eat. So what else about sumac? I guess that's it for now. I forgot to tell you about sumac is that the best time to gather sumac would be in the middle of the summer, July and August, and maybe in September, but you wait too long and then the flavor starts to go away. So another one of my favorites here, stinging nettle. Stinging nettle, sometimes known as burn hazel, and the stuff that stings your ankles when you're walking through the woods, but it is a superfood, and this is one that at first taste you might think, what's the point of going after stinging nettle? But it is a powerhouse of nutrition. These people that drink their green smoothies with kale and whatnot in it, spinach and stuff like that. Well, this knocks the socks off of kale and spinach in terms of nutritional profile. So a very, very nutritional green leafy plant, and it is available most of the year. The best time is in the fall and the spring when the leaves are tender and succulent. And of course, when you gather this stuff, you're using gloves to not get stung. The plants have, on little barbs, they have oxalic acid, and which is what causes the stinging sensation. And stinging nettle, the first time we tried to prepare it, fail. It was terrible, and we've since discovered the best way to do this this plant is just to harvest it like you would some of your other vegetables, blanch it and freeze it, and then pull it out of the freezer, chop it into small pieces while it's frozen, and throw it in a soup or a stew. And you don't really taste the plant at all in your soup, but it certainly adds some color to your chicken corn noodle soup or whatever it is. I think it goes best in chicken corn noodle soup. The other way that's just kind of fun when you're walking through the woods is to carefully take off a leaf And you can see the plant there. That's what a stinging nettle looks like. Most of them are frozen, but I found one that wasn't quite frozen yet. And if you look very closely, you can see the little hairs that have the oxalic acid on and that sting you. But anyway, if you're very careful, you fold the leaf over on top of itself and then crush it, you can actually eat these things, you know, fresh and green. They taste like a kind of a green plant. Don't have a really outstanding flavor, but if you don't crush it and fold it over, you can give yourself a little rush in the mouth by just popping a leaf into your mouth when you're on a walk, and that'll keep you stepping for a little bit. One thing I've learned to do when I'm on walks in the woods and whatnot is to take notice of plants that are edible, but they're in a different phase of development or yearly life cycle. Sometimes easier to identify when they are not at the in their edible stage. But anyway, behind me here I happen to see some fox grapes, and it's a wild grape and truly amazing little snack if you find some in the wild, especially if they're dead ripe, maybe a little bit overripe. Very small grape. You just pop the whole thing in your mouth and crunch on the seed, and it's delicious. But I noticed some I don't know if you can see them behind me here, but just a viney mess in this tree behind me. And so now I know next September I should keep my eyes open in this area for some fox grapes. I see some dried out ones hanging in the branches now, but they're long gone and not much good to eat at this point. And maybe a little bit later I'll show you some burdock, which is really easy to identify this time of the year. And you know, I can kind of make note of that area and say, oh, well, there's a lot of burdock here, so next year I can come back in the spring or the fall and harvest some burdock here. So just a great exercise to keep your eyes open for plants that might not be ready to go now, but sometime later they'll be fun to eat. Behind me here is just a huge stand of burdock, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. We used to call them cockleburs when I was young. These little guys right here stick to your clothes and whatnot. So nothing really too edible here right now, but the root of the burdock plant is yeah, it's a great food. You can skin it and chop it and stir fry it and put it in stews and whatnot. It's not too great to eat raw, but it's a highly nutritious food, and a friend of mine is actually growing it for a tea company. So believe it or not, he's cultivating burdock, which many would consider a weed. So but the reason I'm pointing this out here is that I'll likely be back to this spot next year or next fall, because I know I'll be seeing burdock that's in its prime to be dug, and I'll dig a few here and maybe do something with them. But the root of the burdock can grow quite large, much bigger than a carrot, and so it's a great food, especially for winter time stews and stir fries. Hey, here's something that you'll be able to find just about any time of the year, and that's white pine. White pine is super easy to identify, so I'll show you how. Okay, so first of all, very long and fine needles, but all the needles where they're connected to the branch, they're connected in a little bunch. Let me see if I can show you this. Okay, see the end of that? It's a number of needles come together in a little woody stem that connects several needles, and there's always 5 in that bunch. Okay, so all you have to do is pull off a little bunch of needles, see if you got 5, and it's a white pine, and you're good to go. There are some evergreens that are quite poisonous, so you want to be careful with with evergreens. But there are also many evergreens that are edible. So how in the world do you eat white pine? Well, believe it or not, these things are super high in vitamin C, and A lot of people would be quite surprised to know that. But if you just take it raw and put it in your mouth, you'll taste, you know, that strong pine flavor, but along with the pine, you'll taste the sour flavor of vitamin C. The sour is a little bit more of the aftertaste, but either way, a quite pleasant flavor. Anyway, that's just a nibble, but of course the needles are quite fibrous, so I don't usually swallow them. The real way that white pine is usually consumed is in a tea. So you gather a bunch of these needles, take it home, and I'm gonna get some right now because I would like to make a tea when I get home. All right, so all you'd have to do is just boil some water, throw the needles in, and let them steep for a good while, and you got white pine tea. Now, what I often like to do is put a little mint with that, just to add some flavor. The mint goes really well with the white pine, and it has kind of a, I don't know, Christmassy flavor, I like to call it. But a neat story about white pine. So you've probably heard about sailors coming over from Europe and the long voyage being so deficient in vitamin C because of the type of food they ate on the ship, that they would arrive in the New World with scurvy, and which is a disease you get from vitamin C deficiency. Well, some of them, in their contact with the Native Americans, were nursed back to health with white pine tea. So I think that's pretty neat. The Native Americans knew what these people needed. Somehow they knew they were vitamin C deficient, and they didn't know of such a thing as vitamin C, but they knew the white pine was something that could help these sick sailors. So just a cool story about white pine, and that's something, like I said, you could do it today or tomorrow. Any time of the year there's white pine needles out there because they're evergreen. So it's a great wintertime vitamin C punch, especially at a time of the year when you don't get a lot of vitamin C. It has more vitamin C than citrus. I'd say it's probably the best source of wintertime vitamin C. So here's a crabapple tree full of crab apples, like you can see, and I like to eat these in the fall. Many varieties are very astringent, so they kind of pucker your mouth, but sometimes you'll find a variety that's pretty sweet, and that's pretty cool. But one thing that I found last spring that just was pretty cool, I picked a crab apple off of a tree right here behind me and tasted it in the springtime. This is early spring, and honestly, it tasted like a really smooth, well-aged wine. It was phenomenal. It was just, the texture was terrible, but the flavor was something that you just, I don't know, it just exploded with flavor, very rich flavor, and very delicious. The one I just ate right there is just like a little tart bite. Just last week I found something out here that was quite delighting because I had never found one in the wild, although I had used them before. I had never ID'd them when I was out and about. But I found these strange looking plants in this meadow, and I said, what's that? It has all these long little seed pods. If you break open the seed pod, it has something a lot like a milkweed fluff. And so I looked it up, and here we've got dogbane, and dogbane is not edible. And if you know, I mean, just going by the name, bane is an older English word for poison, especially a fatal poison. So poison for dogs, they named it dogbane. So don't eat dogbane. But what's really cool about dogbane is that you can harvest the stalks. Let's just pull one out here. And I'll show you in a minute what you can do with these things. Okay, so here's what you can do with the dogbane. Dogbane is a fiber, a very fibrous plant. So if you break the stem, and well, I'm not really showing you the right way to do this because I'm not really in a good place to do it. But you can see here, if I peel off the bark, it's a very fibrous bark. And if you take off that woody inner stem, what you have left is this. And you clean that up a little bit, and you twist it, and you braid it. And here in my pocket, I can show you what I made with one the other day. You can make string, and it really doesn't take that long once you get proficient at it. And I've enjoyed making string, and you can make some really natural looking bracelets and anklets and necklaces and whatnot, and I guess you could use it for practical purposes too. Anyway, another name for dogbane is Indian hemp, because it looks a lot like hemp fibers, although the plants are not related. So during the growing season, dogbane looks a lot like milkweed. So if you're looking for dogbane, look for something that looks like milkweed in the growing season. But you saw the dogbane just a minute ago in the field. Those seed pods are a dead giveaway for dogbane. Those long, slender seed pods. Here we have it, guys. There's a whole lot more that I could have said, and maybe a lot more that we could have talked about how to prepare these different plants to eat them. And but hopefully you have some questions, and give me a call, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you have. Have a good one, and have fun learning about plants. Oh, and a couple resources for you. You know, if this stuff interests you, there's a lot of fun things that you can do to educate yourself. First of all, books, and second of all, websites, and third, Facebook groups and pages, and smartphone apps. I mean, there's so much information out there these days, and here I'll put a few of my favorites for you to see. See you later.